memorandum binding on the whole world. It is therefore binding not only on the parties to the dispute, but even non-parties. Therefore, once the status of a person or thing has been pronounced upon by a court of competent jurisdiction, no person is permitted to assert the contrary of what the court has decided. See Black's Law Dictionary, 11th edition at page 1008. Demishola versus Bolarinwa, Yanati Petrochemical Limited and EFCC. Then Ladi Jobi and others versus Oguntayo and others, citation supply. It is no doubt that the judgment matter in PDP and INEC others X1 was in respect of the alleged double nomination of the first respondent as the vice president candidate of the second respondent in the 25th February 2023 presidential election. That is the same issue raised in this petition as grounding the disqualification of the third and fourth respondent in this petition. Pronouncing on the issue in this case, in the contradictory judgment, my Lord Okoro JSC, who presided on the panel of the Supreme Court, held as follows, I quote, "There is no doubt that the fourth respondent was at a stage nominated as a candidate representing Borno Central District, but upon being muted, he would pair with the third respondent as vice presidential candidate of second respondent, All Progressive Congress, APC, in the 26th February 2023 general election. He withdrew his candidature for the Senate before taking up the position of vice president candidate. Documents in the record attest to this fact. These are APC 1, APC 2, which were made on the 6th and 10th of July 2022, respectively, close of court. After considering those documents, His Lordship concluded at page 7 of the contrary judgment that, quote, "It is crystal clear that the two exhibits alluded to above, the fourth respondent did the needful by resigning his position of senatorial candidate for Borno Central District since 6 July 2022, before being nominated by the third respondent to run alongside him as vice presidential candidate of All Progressive Congress," close of court. My Lord Okoro went on to, after citing section 31 of the Electoral Act 2022, held at page 8 of his contradictory judgment that I quote, "The above provision of the Electoral Act 2022 was duly complied with by the respondent. It is my well-considered opinion that as at the 6th of July 2022, having withdrawn his nomination and personally served him on the second respondent of the withdrawal of nomination on 6 July 2022, the fourth respondent was no longer a candidate for the Borno Central District elections, and his subsequent nomination as vice presidential candidate of the second respondent for the presidential election was not multiple nomination, as there was no longer a nomination for the fourth respondent since his withdrawal on the 6th of July 2022. I have also cited the elaborate contribution of His Lordship, Ajim JSC. So I have endeavored to quote extensively the dicta of the laws of the Supreme Court in PDP and INEC Supra in order to show that the issue of double or even multiple nomination of the fourth respondent as the central candidate and vice presidential candidate of second respondent in the 25th February 2022 general election has been settled to finality. It is a judgment in rem, therefore binding on the parties to this petition and in fact the entire world, including this court. Being the judgment of the final court of the land, of this land, this Supreme Court, no person is permitted to again raise and litigate on it in any other action or proceeding. It is therefore settled and remains settled that this petition, which questions the qualifications and seeks to disqualify the third and fourth respondents from contesting and occupying the seat of President and Vice President of Nigeria on ground of double or multiple nomination of the first respondent and Vice President candidate of the second respondent on ground of double or multiple nomination of fourth respondent has no substance. I only wish to add that Section 35 of the Electoral Act is targeted at the candidate and not the political party. That is why it uses the terms a candidate and normally allows himself to be nominated by more than one political party or more than one constituency. Thus, to prove that a candidate knowingly allows himself to be so nominated, both the intent and actual acts of nomination, that is, the mens rea and actus reus of the act prohibited, must be proved. the stipulation in the section being a penal provision. In the instant case, neither the intent nor the fact of the first respondent to allow himself to be so nominated was established. That's why His Lordship Ogumi JSC, in his contributory judgment in Exhibit X1, held as follows, I quote, by Section 31 of the Electoral Act, the first respondent, Shetima, was obliged to submit a notice of withdrawal in writing to his party, which he did, and then his party is to deliver that notice to the Commission not later than 90 days to the election. In view of the above stated position of the law on this issue and the facts of this case, there exists no animus or display of intention by the first respondent to stand as the nominated candidate of the second respondent for the vice presidential position and also the senator representing Borno Central District in the general election of 25 February 2023. There cannot be any other interpretation in the circumstances unless there is clear intention to knowingly stand as a candidate for two elective posts in the same election cycle. Jim JSC also contributed as follows, quote, the manifest intention to relinquish the earlier nomination to pave way for the nomination of another person to replace him as the party's central candidate cannot be overlooked or disregarded. To simply isolate the assumed or purported short-lived coexistence of the two nominations for treatment as multiple nominations without regard to the obvious intention of the first respondent not to be the party's candidate in elections in two constituencies is against the legislative intent of Section 35 of the Electoral Act 2022. The sequence of the occurrence of the events is not what determines the existence of multiple nominations. It is the intention, design, or purpose to hold two or more nominations as candidate for election that shows that the person so nominated knowingly did so. The second respondent did not intend that the first respondent should be its candidate for Borno Central election and its vice presidential candidate for the presidential election, and the first respondent did not understand or know that he was so nominated. The word knowingly in Section 35 of the Electoral Act must be interpreted broadly to include all its literal meanings. Barton's Legal Thesaurus, 4th edition by William C. Barton at page 356. It is defined to include advisedly, deliberately, designedly, intentionally, learnedly, pointedly, purposefully, with knowledge, etc. It is clear to me, therefore, that from the oral and documentary evidence adduced by the parties on this petition, the intention and fact of knowingly allowing himself to be nominated in more than one constituency as alleged by the petitioner against the first respondent has not been established. In other words, both the mens rea and actus reus of the act prohibited by Section 35 of the Electoral Act 2020 were not established. One other aspect alleged by the petitioner on his claim of invalid nomination of the third and fourth respondent is that the second respondent did not comply with Section 33 of the Electoral Act in the nomination of the first respondent as vice presidential candidate, that after the withdrawal of the fifth respondent, the second respondent should have conducted a fresh primary election within 14 days for the purpose of nominating a new vice presidential candidate. Now, Section 33 of the Electoral Act stipulates that a political party shall not be allowed to change or substitute its candidate whose name has been submitted under Section 29 of this Act, except in the case of death or withdrawal by a candidate, provided that in the case of such withdrawal or death of a candidate, the political party affected shall, within 14 days of the occurrence of the event, hold a fresh primary election to produce and submit a fresh candidate to the Commission for the election concerned. The interpretation of this provision does not, in my view, cause any difficulty as to require the application of any technical rule of construction. Therefore, a literal interpretation will suffice. It therefore means that where a political party has submitted the name of a candidate pursuant to Section 29 of the Electoral Act Supra, it cannot be allowed to substitute or change that candidate except in the event of death or withdrawal of such candidate. By the proviso thereto, the political party affected is enjoined to conduct a fresh primary election for the purpose of producing a new or fresh candidate to submit to the Electoral Commission. The grounds of the petitioner here is that the fifth respondent withdrew his nomination as vice presidential candidate of the second respondent but the second respondent did not conduct another primary election for the purpose of producing a new vice presidential candidate within the 14 days prescribed by Section 33 of the Electoral Act. It should be remembered that by Section 142, subsection 1 of the 1999 Constitution, a presidential candidate for election to the office of president has the sole discretion, authority, or power of nominating his associate who shall run with him in the election as vice president. The choice or nomination of vice presidential candidate is not the product of any primary election. Therefore, in my view, the requirement to conduct a fresh primary election does not apply to the nomination of a vice presidential candidate. Thus, my Lord Ogi JSC highlighted this point in Exhibit X1 as follows. The fourth respondent was not required to buy any nomination form. He was the second respondent, APC's candidate, at the election into the office of Senator representing Borno Central District. But before the election could hold, he was nominated as the third respondent's associate, who is to occupy the office of vice president. The fourth respondent did not buy a nomination form for the said office, and most importantly, did not contest any primary election in order to emerge as APC's vice president candidate. Close of court. The petitioner in paragraph 28(2) of his petition had averred and also contended in his final address that there was a gap of about 3 weeks between the period the fifth respondent expressed his intention to withdraw and his actual withdrawal or purported nomination, thereby invalidating the nomination of third respondent, because the candidate of the third respondent had lapsed and was no longer in a position to constitutionally nominate a running mate. This contention of the petition is, however, misconceived. There is nothing in the Constitution which robs a presidential candidate of his right to nominate his associate, who shall be his running mate for the office of president. There is also nothing that invalidates the nomination of a new associate by a presidential candidate as his running mate after the withdrawal of a previous associate, so long as the nomination of the new associate was submitted to the first respondent 90 days before the election as mandated by Section 31 of the Electoral Act 2022. This contention of the petitioner is therefore discountenanced. It is therefore my view that, that the position of a person as vice presidential candidate not being subject to primary election, the provision of Section 33 of the Electoral Act 2022 would not apply. On that note, I hereby hold that the petitioner failed to prove the lone ground of his petition to the effect that the third and fourth respondents were not qualified to contest the election held on 25th February 2023 for the reason of double nomination. Having resolved the sole issue of this petition against the petitioner, this petition is held to be devoid of any merit. rise for just 15 minutes and continue with petition number 3 and 5. I can see Dr. Levy moving up and down. So, as elderly person, I know what is going on. Yes.
My Lord, we're just wondering, sir. We just wondering, my Lord, if your brethren agree with your judgments or not.
Pardon?
I said, we're just wondering.
No, it's a consolidated judgment. They will give their contributions after we have read all the judgments.
Oh, my Lord, yes. Please. We just needed to know, sir.
Yes, they will give their.
Thank you very much, my Lord. Thank you, sir.
Call the court.
True.